Hello and welcome. Thank you for watching. And you can also follow me on Facebook on the Universal Life Church of Massachusetts. I also want to thank the new subscribers, and thank you for commenting and all your great comments. I thank you very much. Today, I didn't know what to call this video. I was going to call it philosophy versus religion. And then I was going to call it the origins of religion. But I decided on calling it good is God with an extra O. And it may be a vague topic of what it's about, or maybe it makes sense to you. But it is really a brief history of religion and where it came from. So let's get into it. The first thing we want to start off with is, where did religion come from? Well, it came from philosophy. Philosophy is where religion came from. Philosophy gave birth to religion. And this is just logical because you can't have any answers until you have a question first. And philosophers ask the questions of who are we, where are we, why are we here, all these deep personal questions. Philosophers had to come around first to ask these questions. And they had answers once they started thinking very deeply about it. And those answers are where religion comes in. Now, some people may come up with different answers. Because it doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong, because we live in a dualistic world. And I'll get into more of that later. So, philosophy, we can trace back to the first philosophers back in the Orient and China and Egypt, over 5,000 years ago, when there was first writing and stories that came from previous generations, because that's before writing. Those were the stories. Stories are how our beliefs were shared. If you tell a story, you can pass that story on and it tells a moral. So the Egyptians, and then it moved into like India, Zoroaster. A lot of our Christian ideas and stories in the Bible come from these. The stories of Jesus Christ are repeated, really. So a lot of people may not like to hear that. They want to think that, the story of Jesus was an original story, but it's really just a retelling of the Krishna and the Osiris and Isis and Horus and the Egyptian stories of Christ or of their gods or saviors. And a lot of cultures worshipped the sun, or at least linked their stories to it. So the story can't be lost. Before writing, if you needed an important story to withstand the test of time, you had to link it to something that was around you, and the stars were there. And as far as where these stories came prior to that, we can discuss that. Maybe there was earlier ancient philosophical societies before the Egyptians. But during the fourth dynasty of the Egyptians was a golden age, and it was an age of peace. And there wasn't war. People worked together. And it was a peaceful time. And out of that came the lessons and the stories and of the answers to the philosophical questions. Who are we? And that headed off into Greece, 1,500 years, or 500 years, 1,000 years after Zoroaster. It worked its way from Egypt in through India and into Greece. And a lot of the Greek philosophy, the philosophers, like Plato and Socrates, Pythagoras, they all preceded Christianity. This was the philosophy era, and they used gods to tell their stories. Greek mythology has all kinds of stories that are used to try and teach us about ourselves and our mind. What they did was they created a god to represent qualities of human beings. And that way they could express the battles between the qualities in our minds. These were deep thinkers, and they were trying to express very complex ideas and have them passed down, because this was a time they were being lost. During the time of these ideas of peace that came from Egypt through the Zoroasters into Greek, they started to lose standing. The philosophy was breaking down right at this time when Greek philosophies were at their height. And because of that, religions came around. I mean, they were there before, but we're talking about the Catholic religions and Judaism and most of what people follow today. So when philosophy broke down, which philosophy and religion were intertwined, because philosophy was answering the questions and giving the answers to these questions through logic and reason and understanding. But when the logic and reason and understanding broke down, when the philosophy broke down, the religions continued on without logic and reason and understanding. And because of that, they got lost. Because now you're teachings without reason or logic or understanding it. You're just repeating, creating dogma, traditions that you don't understand where they come from. And when early Christianity started, that's what was happening. So there was a split. And the Cathars were one of the early Christian groups that held on to the philosophy, but it split away from the Catholics, and they were at odds with one another. Now, we're talking about God. God is good. That's what the Bible tells us. Now, it's not telling us that God does good things. This is the big mistake. God is the quality of good that is in you. God is good. The Bible tells us, John tells us, 1 John, God is light. He said that Jesus told him that God is light. There is no darkness in him at all. That's what he says. Because light, which we get from the sun, is good. We need it to survive. It gives us nutrients. It gives us life. And for thousands of years, That sun up there was good. When the night came, it was a dangerous time. So they expressed to let people know what good God is. God is good. God is light. It is the quality of good and that energy of good. All right, so anytime you hear the word God, just replace it with the word good. And that will tell you whether the word is being used correctly. If someone says good is in you, yeah, good is in me. And good is in you too. If someone says good is outside of you, up in the sky, and not in you, well, that doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah. Because if you start to believe that good is outside of yourself and not in you, well, then you're going to be a sinner, right? You're not going to be any good. You're going to be a victim to this entity outside yourself, which you think is good. Greek mythology made gods personifications of qualities like good. Good is just God with one less O. Now we got to keep that in mind here, because the devil is evil with a D in front of it for darkness. God is light, like John said. The devil is evil. Evil is, the word evil with a D in front of it is devil. And the D is for darkness. And it's the basic, it's simple, and it's right in front of everybody's face, but they don't want to accept it because they want it to be something more than that. They want it to be something more. But it doesn't need to be, because it's very, very powerful. The power you get of understanding that there is good in you. And you are good. You are God. And when someone says, oh, by saying that you're God is a horrible thing. Saying that you're good is a horrible thing? What are they teaching people? That good isn't in you? Good is in you. God is in you. Don't let anybody tell you differently. The sacred heart that Jesus holds is where it's at. It's where you do your thinking. You already know right from wrong. You just have to think with your heart. And what is right? What is selfless? Let's think of it this way. We have good over here and evil over here. It's a sliding scale. It's actually a circle, but let's pretend it's a sliding scale. You've got good on one end and evil on the other. All right? And in the middle is quality. What is actions? And on the God side, the good side, is the side of selflessness. On the evil side is the side of selfishness. So everything that is selfish is evil. Everything that is selfless is good or God. Now, selfishness is not evil simply because it's bad for other people. It's evil because it's bad for you. It's bad for your mind. When you do selfish things, you're propagating demons, which are negative thought processes in your head that cause you suffering later on. These are the secrets that all the Gnostics, Freemasons, Mithras, Rosicrucians, And that's why I'm not a Freemason, because I can't take the oath, because I'm telling you this stuff. If I take the oath to be, because I almost was, I thought about it, but I would rather teach this. Get this out, because it needs to come out. It needs to be said, because we're in a desperate time where there's so much ignorance out there. It's causing a lot of suffering. The world needs a healing. And if we don't, going to suffer. So it's time for healing. So let me go back to the beginning to talk about something, evolution, and how the human mind actually started to be self-aware. I mean, were we always self-aware when, it was Cro-Magnon man and some of the earliest human beings self-aware? Did they have these questions of where we are? Who are we? What am I? Who is asking this question? Who is observing? All these things. Deep thoughts. Self-awareness, consciousness. Was it always there from the beginning, very beginning, from the moment we crawled out of the ocean? Or did it develop over time? Now, how this evolution happens is DNA has a flaw in it that happens every 10,000 or 100,000 strands of DNA. There's a flaw. And it's not really a flaw, but it's called that. It's actually there. It's what enables evolution. Because every once in a while, this flaw that pops up creates a being with an abnormality, and that abnormality could be beneficial to its survival, or it could be negative to its survival. And then, of course, if it is negative to its survival, it will diminish and disappear. But if it's positive, if this abnormality that happens is positive to the survival of that human being, then it will thrive. And it's a good possibility that that abnormality in the DNA will spread through the offspring of that person. And then if it's an abnormality that is beneficial to the survival of the species, then it will spread and eventually become normal and no longer an abnormality. And this is possibly how self-awareness eventually came about. Now, there are even philosophers will have this question, what came first? The human mind and the self-awareness and philosophy that created the idea of God, or God that created the mind, that flaw, to enable self-awareness to be possible. Now, there is no right answer to that, because they're both true, because we're talking about a circle, like I said before. If we remember the Hermetic principle of a dualism, that we live in a dualistic world, everything has an opposite. Every action has a reaction. Every up and down, left and right, stop and go. But like stop and go is motion. They're both the same thing. It's just a degree of motion. God and the devil, or good and evil, are the same thing. It's a quality, and it's a degree of that quality. So it's the same thing. So I hear a lot of people talking about, oh, these Luciferian churches, they're so horrible and they're terrible. Yes, they may create a lot of suffering for themselves, but they're learning the same teachings and rules of the universe as the anybody that is understanding what really God is. I mean, but you cannot find these teachings within much of the Christianity anymore because they've been lost. There's no logic or reason left in them. So we've got to get back to that and bring logic and reason back into, and philosophy back into religion. And that's what's happening. It is happening, and that's what the Freemasons have done. Let's go back now to where we were in Greece, and the philosophers. They spawned these religions, which the Catholic religion had already started the Greek Pythagoras and Plato, they were like 500, 400 BC, before Christ. And that spawned the religion. Catholic religion, Christianity, Christ, and all these stories and the writings of this. And when the philosophy broke down, the religions went on their way. Without the logic and the reason, they just had these stories, and they were trying to, it's like knowing the answer to a complicated mathematical problem, but not knowing how you got there. So you just keep repeating the answer and saying, this is this because of this, and that's it. I don't know how I got there, but that's it. So the Cathars split away from them. And the Catholic Church, not being good at the time, I mean, because it's fluctuated over the years, they killed them. If they're killing people, there's a good point here. If you're killing people, you're not good. All right? Easy as that. So when the Cathars were slaughtered by the Catholic Church, we know who was good and who wasn't. The ones doing the killing. Of course, some people were defending themselves and trying to fight back, but it was the Catholic Church that sought them out, and others. And the Gnostics, because the Gnostics were another group that was using philosophy. The Mithras, the pagans were using not so much philosophy, but they were on the right track. They were following the same stories that had come out and linking them to the stars, to the stories about themselves. And what it means, what good is. Good is the sun. Sun is good, and I'm good. So I'm like the sun. All right? So that's how they started teaching people to be good. But that broke down. The philosophy of what God is broke down. And the religions took over and started sweeping and getting rid of anybody that was teaching that God is good is within you. They wanted you to be a victim and be dependent on an outside source for good. Them. And they'll tell you how to act and what to do. And if you don't, they'll tell you you're going to hell, and maybe they'll kill you. But the Freemasons tried to hold on to the philosophy. So they had to, and a lot of these other secret societies like the Gnostics and the Mithras, they had to keep it quiet, because the powers that were out there wielding the axes and cutting people's heads off didn't want you spreading the truth. They wanted their beliefs. Now, they believed they were right, but if they're killing people, you're not right. Simple as that. So we know. All right? So they came out and they wiped them out. So that's why the Freemasons had to basically keep quiet about their secrets, because you can't let people know what it is that you're teaching, because if it goes against it, ignorant people don't want you to learn. They want to keep you dumb. So anybody that's telling you that there's information out there you shouldn't learn, it's dangerous, it's evil, you don't need to know that. Anybody that tells you that stuff is trying to keep you ignorant. There is no such thing as bad information. It's what you use. It's what you do with that information. So anybody that tells you don't learn about that, don't keep yourself ignorant, is not helping you in any way. And that's exactly what the early Catholics were doing to the Gnostics and the anybody, Cathars, even the Freemasons. They were the Knights Templar. They also were the philosophers, and they split off of the Catholic Church. They were the guards of the Roman Catholic Church. But they saw how horrible the Roman Catholic Church was acting. They were killing people. They were not acting good. God wasn't in them because their teachings taught them that God was outside of them. And once you believe that, you head down the path of evil because you don't have good in you. Good's out there. So, let's move on. What are these teachings? The Freemasons took these teachings and they basically kept the secrets to themselves so they wouldn't be slaughtered by the Catholics. But along the way, different popes have come in and tried to get the philosophy back. And it has a lot from since then, because you can see the church isn't going around slaughtering people anymore. They still have their problems. But there's good and bad in everything. And that's what I got to understand about this sliding scale. When we try to label any large group of people, good or bad, we're not doing a justice to ourselves, because there's good and bad in everything. You and me, there's good and evil. If you do selfish things, it's evil. If you do selfless things, it's good. So anybody says that I'm pure and I'm totally good, that's bullshit. And they just don't understand the teachings. The idea is to know what good and evil is, and why selfishness is evil, and what it does to your mindset when you do selfish things over and over and over. What it propagates. It propagates demons, which are negative thought patterns, thought processes in your mind. That it's good to be selfish and evil and harm others. That doesn't do you any good. That's why it's called evil. Selflessness is good. And that's the message of Jesus. That was the message of Jesus. The message of selflessness. He was so selfless, he gave his life for you. And they try to express that. They make these beings represent emotions and feelings, qualities of what human beings are. And it was linked to the sun. A lot of times it was linked to the sun. The birthday of the sun is December 25th. Jesus is December 25th, the solstice. These holidays are always around the solstice. And the reason for that is because the light from the sun is good. Light photons, particles of light, carry information. They can be split and we see a rainbow, all the different colors. So there's information. Each one has different information in them. The electrons in the atoms in your body receive this light. So the sun is communicating with you, giving you nutrients and life, and actually giving you information. The sun, which may be a conscious being, is giving you, sending you information. So is that invisible man in the sky, the sun, that is invisible light is being sent to us, which has information in it, which gives us energy, life. It's good. So maybe the invisible man in the sky is not that far off, is it? But you can see it was misinterpreted. And the goodness, if when you do good, selflessness, it changes your mind. It creates a better person. It raises the Kundalini oil in there and allows your pineal gland to activate. And when it does, a new perspective and a new ability to perceive the world and see things that others can't see is activated. Your DNA, some believe, actually changes through an enlightenment process. And only those who go through that process were allowed the information that the Freemasons and the Gnostics and the Mithras and the early Christians withheld. Because it was withheld because people that don't understand it don't want to don't want to think that there's anybody that knows more than them. Ignorance wants to make you ignorant too. Ignorance doesn't want anybody to know anything more than they know. Because ignorance thinks it knows it all. That is the definition of ignorance, thinking that you know it all. And, atheists are... I used to be an atheist for a long part of my life. And then I realized I don't know it all. I didn't know it all. Because atheists are making a declaration that, God doesn't exist and I have no proof for it and I don't have to back it up. Because I know it all already. That's an ignorant statement. It's a declaration of ignorance. There is more to know. And anybody that says I don't believe in good, I don't know what to say. You're not thinking logically or reasonably. And we need to embrace good, God, because it's important. All these religions wouldn't be trying to teach this for thousands of years if it wasn't a life-changing secret involved in it. It's not an easy thing to express and explain to people what an enlightenment of the mind and lighting up your pineal gland and the changes that it does to your mind. It's not an easy... you have to experience it for yourself. And until you do, you won't believe it. Just like in the movie The Wizard of Oz, you have to experience, like the Glenda the Good Witch says to Dorothy at the end, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. You have to experience it for yourself. Then you know. Gnosis. The Gnostics comes from knowing. Knowing comes from having the experience. Because if you don't have the experience, you don't know. You can only guess. You either have faith and believe, or you know. And that's what's happened. And all religions split. So to say that one is good and one is bad, Islam, there are two different kinds of the Muslims. You got the Sunnis and there's two different sides or more. And one side is the one that holds philosophy, and the other side doesn't. One side has the logic and the reason to back up all this dogma, and so it fits together. Science, philosophy, and religion should all fit together perfectly. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong. You better start thinking and using a little more philosophy to figure out what don't I get, what don't I understand. And I don't want to make this too long. I just wanted to get those points across. And I thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please ask them. I'll answer all questions. and you have a great day.